I wanted to pause before we go into the generations in detail to talk a little bit about a brief history of pedagogy or teaching in the 20th century. I thought it'd be interesting just to get a little bit of history of educational process and how things were shaped during the 20th century. A lot of changes took place, and there was a lot of key players that I think you need to know about to understand where we've come from and some of the things that we are still dealing with as a result. Start off with 1918, compulsory education was enacted for children ages 7 to 16. This became law in every state, but only about half of them enrolled. Pretty hard to enforce at that point, with family farms still going and people needing to get their kids off to school and access to school as well. But the average student received only about 5 years of education during this time. That's really important as what came on the scene next. The progressive education movement, obviously there was the progressive movement in politics, but there was also the progressive movement in general in society. In 1918, there were some visionary leaders. Not all of them agreed, but a key player was John Dewey, who advocated education for all. And then there was Robert Hutchins, who was the youngest president of the University of Chicago during that time period, and he was very influential, and he was an elitist and argued that education should just remain for the elite, and that education shouldn't be open for everyone, but just for those who were able to do it and who had access, those that had higher IQ levels. Whereas Dewey saw it as an opportunity to socialize the population in behavioral matters, as well as working with industry that we'll see here as we go forward. We'll continue on here with the progressive education movement. William Wirt, he adopted Dewey's philosophy, implementing the Gary Plan. Gary, Indiana, just outside of Chicago. During that time period and through the 20th century, if you're familiar with that part of the country, it's a very industrial area. A lot of factories. A lot of times I drive through there on my way to Chicago, where I went to college in the mid-'80s. You smell sulfur and things like that. So it was part of the Rust Belt that you may have heard of with the Great Lakes State. A lot of industry, auto factories, steel mills. So he adopted Dewey's philosophy, came to be known as the Gary Plan, which was influencing schools to teach kids to meet the needs of industry. So a lot of socialization was going on, kids working in groups. Schools were also used to help enculturate a lot of the immigrants that were coming over at that time. School was seen as a way to help with the socialization of immigrants and their children. The Dalton Plan, this was developed to show that academic work could equal contract units. Depending on the number of contract units you had, then you were qualified like a competency type base, for example, an apprenticeship, or like in nursing, where a certain amount of your academia would count toward employment qualification. A lot of interesting things going on here within the society and culture in general. The Industrial Revolution was well underway. Immigrants coming in, a lot of these things had a lot of influences on education. Okay, and once again, emphasis on publication, high school diplomas, the work credits equal to work certificate, so you were coming out of high school ready to go and be employed in a factory or for a plumber or something like that, some sort of physical work. Nursing and the education system was geared to help industry. Schools mirrored the environment of the factory in a lot of ways, with different workstations where kids would go and work on things and group projects and such. Individualized preparation was overlooked so students could be prepared to meet the needs of industry. One of the things that schools focused on, we talked about a little bit already, was behavior. So a goal of the early industrial era was to socialize the behavior of immigrants. Pedagogy concentrated on rewards and punishment for behavior. Academic achievement was not rewarded. It was the end. It was the goal of getting you acclimated and prepared to go work in a factory so you could have a good job and contribute to society through your work and your contribution and earning a living and supporting causes, government, paying taxes, that sort of thing. So the behavior was really the focus more than the education at this point in our nation's history.